All right, welcome to this exciting project that we're working on with our family. We are a family that reads together and even writes together, and there have been many books, there have been many pieces of literature that have affected our journey together and that have been the topic of a lot of great conversations, but also the centerpieces of a lot of great adventures as well. So we used to have our great conversations over the kitchen table. We don't share a kitchen table anymore, so we're going to be using Zoom, but this is our new kitchen table. And this project is with my mom and my sister Rebecca because we're talking about or thinking about my mom's books. She is a writer and she wrote 13 romance novels. And so we thought, what better literature to start our book talks off with than her own? So I'm going to hand it over to the MC, my lovely sister Rebecca.
Thanks, Marty. Yeah, so we are going to be kind of exploring mom's journey through going from being a reader of romance novels very heavily into her life as a writer and still an enjoyer, and kind of how that has influenced all of our reading as well, or at least mine. So that kind of leads me into the first thing I wanted to touch base on is just if we could take time to talk about our familiarity with romance novels. I know the three of us, mom and I guess, have a little bit of similarity with our reading and our reading levels. But Marty, do you want to start off with what is your exposure and previous knowledge of like romance novels?
Nothing. I was, grew up watching my mom read them. But other than that, n nothing really. I have zero. I have some experience in philosophy with the great philosophical treatises on romance, Plato's Symposium in particular. But like, even like a lot of the literature that I read from my English literature, almost none of it was considered, strictly a romance or anything like that, because even Shakespeare's romances, are technically speaking comedies. So,
Mm-hmm.
and there may be time later to explain some of those, technicalities of genre, but I will forego that for now. But anyways, the um, only thing that I can really remember in terms of even movies romances was Romancing the Stone, which my mom
Yeah.
used to love. So we watched that a lot. But in terms of reading romances, not much.
Yeah, it's really interesting, especially when it comes to the genre. I would love to talk about that more later on, like the genre classifications, because for like a really long time, and especially now, um, I feel like almost that people were using the term romance on genre as kind of like a fluff term and as a way to like kind of cut out the knees of a lot of literature unfairly in a lot of ways. So like even with Shakespeare's more romancy periods, like they would probably very much push for those to be comedies in there because being a romance was that was just for women and that kind of thing. And there's a lot of pushback and nowadays of kind of saying like why are so many books being kind of like discredited a little bit in like literary circles just because there is a romance element to it. So that'd be interesting to talk about later. Mom, do you want to talk about your kind of personal journey with romance and your exposure and how much you read it maybe in the past versus in now?
Sure. I have, you two are two out of six children, and that required a lot of supervision. Not always interactive supervision, but just making sure that when you were out on your big wheels out in front, you were safe and keeping an eye on things that you didn't kill each other or do anything super dangerous. And so romances to me um, were a way of passing time while I sat out on the front porch watching you guys. At the time, I don't know if it still is or not, but it was called popcorn reading. And it's because you, you just read them like popcorn. It didn't require all kinds of deep thought. And it was a bit of an escape Um, from, I don't know, I think the hardest part about life, Marty could probably speak to this later, is that regardless of what phase you're in, it's 24/7. And taking care of little kids and never really getting to speak to an adult because your husband would come home tired um, was hard. And so it was nice to have an escape and be in a world where um, you knew in the end things would work out.
Hmm.
You didn't have, you knew it was going to have a happy ending. And the tricky part of writing a romance is it was highly criticized because it was considered formulaic. And to me, the tricky part of writing a romance was yes, there was a formula. You knew there would be a happy ending. And so, how do you be creative and engage your readership within that formula?
Yeah, I think totally. Because I think that is something that has drawn me towards those books over the years. I think I probably started reading romance maybe a little inappropriately young.
Yeah, I used to sneak in and get my books.
So just to paint a picture for people, our house, we have always been, as Marty said, like a really big reading house. It never questioned to me to like, it was never a question in my mind to get into reading because books were just everywhere, both between like mom and dad. And then there's 15 years in between me and Marty. So they had already their stash of books growing when I was, just a baby. So like every tabletop, I'm not even exaggerating when I say that, would have at least a book on it. And usually it was like a stack of it. So like every end table usually had a few. Every bedside table, our kitchen table usually had a few on them. And so I think I started reading romance probably inappropriately young as because they were just like around and I would just grab them because, you want to be interested in what the adults around you are reading. And like my mom was reading these, my sisters were reading these. So I would just grab them and like read it. And I think I liked the most for me with it was a lot of like there was this when you're especially if you're going through your teen years, everyone's so uncomfortable and doesn't really feel like they have like a place until they figure out what their place is. And in like the romance novels, everyone kind of like knew their place. They were wanted by people and they knew exactly where they fit in. So it was kind of a nice escapism in that where you could like go into a world where adults had kind of already figured it out to a certain extent. And they went through hijinks but in the end, they'd always kind of like worked out, like mom was saying. And they are in a lot of ways, at least I would call them the classic romance novel styles that I grew up with, which aren't actually the classic ones. It would be more of like the bodice rippers would be the true classics. But the late 90s, early aughts ones were very much in that vein of like, usually even if stuff that was bad happened, it wasn't that bad. And you knew that it was going to quickly resolve in a satisfying way. Um, but yes, I've been
In
reading them.
35,000 words, it would resolve.
Exactly. So yeah, I think I probably started reading them when I was like, I don't know, middle school. And read a bunch in high school. I didn't read really anything in undergrad or grad school just because I think my brain was fried and I couldn't take in any additional text. But then just, I would say in the last 5 years, I've gotten back into it and I've seen some cool shifts in like the books that it'll be cool to talk about and get your perspective on. And just was curious if there was anything else that you were thinking about with why are people drawn to this genre so much? Because I think it's one of the most like prolific and money making genres out there. So there's something drawing people into it.
I really think that it's just the knowledge that, well, the popcorn reading, you can read with one eye and keep your eye. You can do two things at once. It doesn't require a great deal of mental thinking, and sometimes we just need that. And the happy ending, sometimes we just need to know that somewhere may not be our reality that particular day, but somewhere, they are living happily ever after. I was going to say the teacher's not going to call and tell you your child was dancing on the desktop or, whatever. things things were cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Mart, what were you gonna add?
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, so like, but Mom, your books have a lot of difficulty that people have to overcome in them, which is part of the thing. So, like, there was a lot of real life. I mean, in whatever way it was an escape, certainly, the ending where it does, because you just kind of cut, there's like, some sort of resolution there, but like life, presumably goes on afterwards. And also, like there's a lot of things that I don't know, like make the journey meander in all kind of different ways. Otherwise, it wouldn't be interesting or enjoyable to read. One of the things
Yeah.
about classifying, romance as a genre, and there may be all kinds of things in modern romance that, qualify it as romance. But, back to our friend Shakespeare, like he either wrote, back then, what would have been either considered a tragedy or comedy. And basically the way you figured out which was if everything came together and was like worked out and there was like a happy ending. They used to say in lit classes, if there was a wedding, then it was a comedy. And then, if it was some horrible dark, you know, um ending, Hamlet being the most classic, probably that most people know, uh, you know, then you're going to have a tragedy or whatever. But I think, again, whatever the official definition of romance is, in my mind, and I kind of heard something like this the other day, what's interesting about it is it kind of combines together the tragedy and the romance in the sense that a lot of your romances especially have quite tragic events in them. So they often start with the tragedy, the death of
Oh, sure.
parents or whatever, or
Hmm.
so like they're, just things that aren't working out like the way people would imagine they're supposed to work out by some idealized version of how life is supposed to be or whatever. And so like then, people have to kind of scramble on their feet. So the romance is to me is that figuring out how to make something, relational and beautiful out of, whatever situations you find yourself in. So you have this weird combination of the, tying together, and it's about our yearning, I think, to some degree, to tie together and to make relational again, what's been broken. And so, yeah, I don't know. That's just some thoughts there for me about why anybody, not just you, but like anybody would like to, to see the romance kind of as a genre play itself out.
Yeah, I would
Yeah.
agree with that. Where I think like one of the it's really hard to define a true like what counts as a romance novel. Like you know it when you kind of see it or when you're reading it, you can feel it in the moment. But to me, like in a lot of the ways, the core defining feature of a romance novel, especially in like the modern um, publications that are coming out, is like they are navigating the shitstorm that is life, and those all the things that come with it by seeking out the emotional connections. Like that is the way that they are grounding themselves. So they are navigating like, there are some storylines that are happen in these books of like super like loss. People will talk about lost family members that have passed away, or they're navigating like cancer diagnosis even in the books and things like that. And it is still kind of a form of escapism a little bit, where even if you are reading a situation that is kind of wrenching to read about because you potentially have experienced it in real life, you can see how other people are navigating this by like the connections around them and how they are processing grief or loss or anything like that. And it is comforting to like not feel like you are the only person going through these situations. You see an example, even if it is a literary fictional example in there, you can kind of go through and be like, okay, well, my new best friend Sarah for the next 350 pages is going through a situation like this, and she's not hitting it out of the park every single way, and she's stumbling and she's maybe even being an ass in some of the parts, but with the connection with her partner, she's able to push through and realize that like it's cool. It's, we're going to get through it together kind of situation. So I don't know. I think that is a really cool part about especially that I feel like more books that are coming out in the last 5 years is that they are really not afraid of hitting on those kind of like crappier parts of life, but doing it in a way that makes it feel like still like you are getting that warm fuzzy at the end. Although sometimes they don't give you the warm fuzzy at the end, and that is a little jarring nowadays. I'm used to it. I got spoiled.
Yeah, that's true. They have tried some lines where there isn't a happy ending at the end, and because I think I'm quite a bit older, I find that very unsatisfying. Why did I read these last all 200 pages for the smaller romances? Why did I read this when there's no real resolution?
Mm-hmm.
I'm finding that in whatever genre there's a lot more cross-genreing now than
Yeah,
there
there
was.
is.
Things were more clear-cut when I first started writing. You had romance, you had adventure, you had mystery. They were all separate. And I think that all of the genres discovered that the cross-genre allowed you to appeal to a much wider audience.
Yeah.
So you've got Nora Roberts and a few other people that the romance is there, but so is some other thing. And I find it in those genres as well, where I read this entire mystery or whatever adventure, and they don't catch the bad guy, and I'm like, wait a minute, why? Why did I just read this whole thing where they never catch the bad guy? I mean, well,
Yeah.
we'll get him someday. And I'm like, what? Excuse me.
The worst, like related to that, is when you read a book and you don't realize that the author is setting it up to be like a trilogy or like something.
Oh.
And you get to the end and you're like, what the hell? What just happened? I have had that happen to me in the last like year so many times where I didn't realize that I was reading the first book in like a soon to be released series. And all of a sudden the book just ends and everything is bad. And I'm just like, this cannot be the ending. But I love the new cross genre stuff. Like that is my jam. My favorite is romantasy is the newest term. It's not even new anymore,
Yeah,
but like the fantasy and romance smushed together. And
otherworldly, yeah.
Yeah, and it's just so cool to like get to have like, in my opinion, like the best of both worlds and those different and some authors do it more successfully than others and navigate that line more successfully, but I am all here for, smushing all of the genres together.
Well, I guess
Taking the bits
within
and
romance,
pieces.
there was always that kind of difference within romance between the
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
ones that
well,
were totally romanticized, so to speak, or
you
like
have to have a
just
problem that
really.
they have to work out. That's true, because without the
Yeah,
problem, there's no
It
story.
seems
they're
like
just hanging
some
out.
were a little more. What was the name of that guy who had one name that was on the cover of a
Fabio.
lot? Fabio, yeah.
Yeah,
There was
Fabio.
some that were a little more just like so like there's a version where it's just kind of a simple like fantasy or wish fulfillment, but there's also another version where you're having to scramble on your feet a lot more to make things happen and it because things aren't going to work out the way you assumed it would or whatever. And so
Yeah, yeah, they might work out well, generally they would still work out, but yeah, very much not necessarily in the way you.
Yeah, anticipate.
yeah, because
Yeah, I
people
tend to.
have to make compromises, I've noticed in your books, Mom. So like especially the female character, the general compromise I would say has to be between sort of having a career and being somewhat independently I don't know, motivated. And then the obligations of family. Everybody's got a tremendous obligation to family. And so there's what's being worked out a lot of times is that
Late
compromise. It
late
seems like,
90s, early 20s, when I was writing, that was a big deal. Um, Women supposedly went to college to get their MRS, not their BA.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And you just went to find a guy, and then you would not work. And there were some women who went on and had careers right out of college. And, they were dual income families. There were those there, but it was not really mainstream. And you would get a lot of criticism and all of the rest of that. And um, it was, kind of hard because you had this training and you really couldn't use it. And I think that you guys are doing such a good job expressing all of um, what goes on. Where with me, my writing is more intuitive. And as I'm listening to you guys explain it to me, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah. But you have to remember that I was a very unhappy kid. And instead, nobody would send their child to talk to a guidance counselor, because you only did that if your kid was burning down buildings. Um, so I always was, well, if I could change the circumstance, I'd be happier. Um, so I told my parents, I'm not enjoying high school, but I think if I could go to college, it would be okay. So I skipped my senior year and I started college when I was 16 years old. And at the time, poor dad, you've got to remember the times.
Uh-oh. I never even thought of this timeline.
You have to remember, this was like, let's see, I graduated.
1970?
Yeah, would have been in the late 60s because I
I
graduated
don't know how long
from
you
college.
dated. Yeah.
Well, about a year and a half or so. I mean, but I started college like late 60s sometime, maybe 67, 68, in through there. So you got to remember the times. But my father, who was the father of 6 daughters and 2 sons, told me that all women should major in math because it would teach them logical thinking.
Which they need.
Oh, Grandpa. He
And
started off so strong, study math. He could have just capped it right there. Fine.
you have to remember,
No, I know.
it never even entered my mind. Oh, Dad, you're being such a chauvinist pig. Never entered my mind. Sciences were more respected than arts.
Yeah.
And so I came out of college with a degree in math and some art. I didn't have like the general core that you guys had. So it's really interesting to me, the way listening to you guys explain all this. I'm like, oh, yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Well, it's very different. I mean, Marty had a true, because as an English major, you probably had a true core, like liberal arts, like for the first 2 years where like it was designed to expose you to a bunch of different things versus engineering sort of, we have like the general education credits that the state mandates. But I mean, like, it's not nearly as, I think it's not nearly as like thought out and deliberate as like a liberal arts degree would be in that regard. But I think it is easier for us to kind of like from an quote unquote outside perspective, look at your writing and be able to like pick those themes out now as we're looking at it holistically versus you were living it in the moment. So like it makes sense that you wouldn't necessarily identify those themes. I will say it's interesting you were pointing about how like unique the working woman was like back then, because I still remember like, I mean, we had some
that
of
was
your
right
friends,
on the cusp of change.
Yeah. And like, I remember still some of my friends' moms. I mean, this would have been late 90s or mid to late 90s and early aughts when I would be in this age. But like, I still have friends moms that were unique and like noteworthy that they worked full time. That was an unusual like trait where like everyone had college degrees of like my friends' moms. That part wasn't the unique, but like the choosing to still maintain their career path was like still unusual even in that path, like in that time. So it makes a lot of sense that the romance novels would be like exploring that because it was a very real thing of like a changing element in society. And something that women would be grappling
with. A lot of criticism too.
Yeah. Oh, I bet. In hindsight, I bet.
They really got it.
But I mean, you did so many different, like, I feel like you had a Barbie style career where you had 1,000 different careers in your lifetime, at least in my childhood. I remember where you went through all of these different phases of like, there was like the American Red Cross. And then I remember like you were substitute teaching heavily for a while. And then you worked in retail for a while. Um, I mean, you were a huge avid reader of romance novels. They were all around the house. What was kind of that kick in the pants or like the moment that helped you finally like transition over to being a writer instead of just a reader? What happened there?
Um, well, um, that type of reading was considered sort of trash, you know. You should be above that. And I reveled in it. I loved it. And I would get some comments like, "You shouldn't be reading that. You should be writing it." And I would be like, "Oh yeah, right.
Mm.
That's going to happen." And then right around then, somebody, and this is not fair because I should be able to credit her, came out with a book called How to Write a Romance, and it gave you all the parameters that editors and publishing houses were looking for, because writing is a really hard world to break into. And so there's a lot of submissions. And if you send in an unsolicited manuscript, at least at that time, it went into what was called the slush pile. And somebody would read it when they got around to it, if you were lucky. And if it wasn't in the correct format or the correct word count for a given line, they didn't even look at it. So, and there were no computers. They were just starting to come out with the IBM Peanut, which I
It was
was
called the
a,
IBM Peanut.
it was their very first little personal computer was called the Peanut.
That's adorable.
And I certainly wasn't going to buy one unless I could sell one. So everything that I wrote was on a typewriter. And so if you made a mistake, you were, according to this book, you could only make like maybe one mistake per page. So that if you made a mistake or did a rewrite, you had to retype that whole, if you were lucky, page. But you had to have 1-inch margins all around. You had to have, I don't remember all of the parameters now, but you had to use a certain size type and you had to do all this, page numbers in the upper right or whatever it was. And if you didn't do it right, you have to redo the whole thing. There was no just
Oof.
back key, So I was like, well, okay, this is not a bad career choice because I will try this because, like I said, daycare for 6, come on, get real. Writing was great because you could do it when the kids were, in school or down for a nap, or, in late at night, whatever. You could do it when you could fit it in. Start a load of laundry, and then go right till that load was done. And I used to do 6 loads every other day. So there was a lot of, that kind of things going on there. And I think it was the third, and that book, How to Write a Romance, also had publishers' names and addresses and what type of books and what lines they had and what type that those lines were. So, you wouldn't be submitting something that was inappropriate for the line that they wanted it for. But it was pretty funny because trying to think, it wasn't you. It had to be Emily, Greg, Andrea, somebody. And it was the third manuscript that I had submitted. And one of them got a hold of it before I could get it in the envelope and mail it away, and crayoned all over the back page. So anyways, I was down in the basement doing some laundry when the phone call came. And I answered the phone and it was the editor from Silhouette calling to tell me that they were going to buy that manuscript. And I was so excited. I've never been so excited in my life. Well, that's not true. I felt that when each one of you was born, but it was pretty darn cool. And I ran out. I tried to call my sister who lived on the next block and she wasn't answering. And of course, no cell phones and no answering machines. She wasn't answering. I called my mom and she wasn't answering. And I just was beside myself, because this was so exciting. When you have a baby, it's exciting, but you get the baby that comes out. Nobody says, oh man, this baby is just. But when you send a manuscript in and they're looking at it and tearing it apart and they're going, yeah, yeah, this is good. It's just a different experience. And I literally ran out of the house and into the street and stopped the first car that went by. And I turned out it was a neighbor from up the street, my sister's next door neighbor, maybe one down from her, I don't remember, but it doesn't matter. And I was like, guess what? Guess what? I sold the book. It was really cool. It was very, very cool.
That's awesome. Yeah, I can't even imagine. Yeah, it's funny that the first person in the world to know that you sold a book was a virtual stranger.
A virtual stranger.
No one was answering their phone.
It could have been worse. Could have been worse. It could have been a total stranger.
Exactly. That's funny. So did you write down in that old basement, or what did writing look like in those early days? Because I remember very distinctly when we lived in Indiana, like I have one of my core memories that locked in was practicing tying my shoes on the sunroom floor while you were like sitting next to me typing on the typewriter in there,
right.
Working on one of the books. It must have been later because if I was like tying shoe age, but yeah, so like I remember distinctly at that house what it would look like. But what did it look like before that? Like when the others were extra young.
I did it at the dining room table. We had the kitchen was not an eat-in kitchen in Wilmette. It was small, and there was a small breakfast bar that took 3 stools. So basically, I could feed you guys some lunch or something.
In rotations.
Not all of you at one time, but the older kids, but we had an old oak round table that my mom had found at a garage sale, and we refinished it out in the front yard. And that was in the dining room. And that's what I wrote at. That's where I had my IBM Selectric.
Not as good of a name as a peanut, but
no, the peanut is definitely better. But yes, it was an amazing time, and that was the beauty of it. You could do it wherever, whenever, and you didn't have to buy a work wardrobe. You didn't have to pay for sitting. It was a very good career initially.
That's awesome. I remember like. I didn't really process what was happening as a child, but like I remember you would go to romance novel conventions pretty regularly, right? Like, I mean, not pretty regularly, but like there was I feel like a few different trips that you went on. Were those designed to like get people to help you like into the industry? Were they training seminars? Were they just like connection networking? Or was it all like, hey, yay, you published, let's all celebrate together kind of things, or all of that together?
It was all of that. Went to one in Dallas and one in Chicago, which I just took the train to downtown. And
yeah, then Dallas is a little further away.
Yeah. And then I went to one in New York.
That'd be cool.
And they were networking, and you got to meet your publisher face to face. And there was also a certain amount of schmoozing and workshops that you went to. It was fun. And you weren't just somebody's mom. You kind of felt a little bit important.
Yeah. You were a fancy pants published writer 13 times over.
Yeah.
Um,
And it was funny, after we moved here and I needed to have a photo taken, and there was a lady around the corner who turned out she was trying to become a photographer. And so she took some photos of me and she told me later that when she told her husband what she'd done, and the guy was like, she writes romance? She seems so normal. I mean, she just drives her kids to things. And I mean, yeah, I mean, there was this aura
yeah.
of being able to say he wrote romance.
So funny because that's like the beginning of Marty brought up Romancing the Stone, which I adore that movie. And there's like that beginning part where like, they're listening to like her fans being like, "Oh, I bet she has such a romantic life." And like, "Oh my goodness, like it's probably so glamorous." And then it's like cuts to her with like in her pajamas finishing her last novel, like snot pouring from her nose from crying at the emotional scene and feeding her cat to celebrate. Like, because it's just like this idea that these people who are writing it, and I still slip into this when I like am reading some of the modern day people, or I just assume I'm like, oh my gosh, they must have like, big fancy houses and they like wine and dine all the time. And in reality, they're like taking their kid, like legitimately reality as they're taking their kid to
Legitimately taking their kids. Yep.
trombone lessons and stuff like that. Yeah, it's very funny, like how we kind of build up the authors in our head
The
to be like
certain, yeah.
Which a lot
otherworldly.
of the characters in Mom's books were doing, which is
Yeah.
carting kids around and all
Well,
kinds of
that was
stuff
my
like
life,
that.
and you write what you know for the most part. And yeah, spent a lot of time in the car,
Yeah.
and it got to be a little bit dangerous sometimes. And it was so funny. I wrote this one scene once where the heroine pulls up to a red light, and you know, she looks both ways, and then she starts to go, and she has to slam on the brakes and go, "Oh, wait, that's not a stop sign. That's a red light." And my editor had to told me that I needed to take that out because it was too scary. I was like,
Oh.
this is stuff that I do. I will drive somebody to trombone and find myself taking the turn to go to swimming. And like
Yeah, yeah,
I
like
mean,
what is that called? I mean, it's a form of autopilot, but there's like that. It's like the brain. I don't know. I don't remember what it's called, but it's like your brain just slides into muscle memory, and you're not actually
muscle memory, and you
processing.
don't. And so I was like, this is great. My actual life is too scary for
You
fiction.
are too wild and crazy for
This
the.
is wonderful.
Um,
No,
Were there any like authors that you feel like that you were pulling inspiration from, or like anybody that I remember your favorite authors growing up because those were the ones that I would gravitate towards like often too. Like one of the ones that is ballooned in popularity recently. I don't know if she actually is one of your favorites, but Julia Quinn is one that I know that means a lot to like me and you and Andrea. Like we love reading the Bridgerton series. And I've like read that series about like 6 different times. And I think I even stole your copies of the books and they're downstairs. Um, but like,
uh,
are there any other and like Nora Roberts, I would say, like, I'm going to steal these. These are the ones that I'm going to steal. Or like Nora Roberts and Julia Quinn, Amanda Quick. A lot of these were ones that
Amanda Quick is an amazing author. I mean,
she's so good.
when I first started reading, it was historicals. There
Yeah.
was there wasn't anything else. But then you gradually got into present day, and then you went futuristic. And Amanda Quick is particularly interesting because that's Jane Ann Krentz.
Oh, that's right. I forgot that's like the same author.
That is
Yeah.
her historical because her
Hmm.
publishers told her, don't associate your real name with these because these aren't
These
going to
are gonna
sell
sell.
as well. And she made some comments at a conference once like, yeah, right, I should never have listened to them. And
Huh.
now her books will say Amanda Quick by Jane Ann Krentz.
Oh,
And
interesting.
and then there was, she has a futuristic one that is now Jane Ann Krentz, but it started as something else.
Well, it's similar to how like JD Robb is Nora Roberts,
Nora
right?
Roberts,
Yeah.
yeah, but it's just a
Yeah.
different futuristic line.
Yeah.
And I believe her most recent ones say JD
Say
Robb.
both.
Nora Roberts writing as JD Robb or something like that.
Yeah.
So I managed to publish my first book right in between those things where I was allowed to publish under my name. And then shortly thereafter, they went back to they want to own your name, so
Pen
you were
name.
to publish under a pen name.
What I was always curious about this, what motivated you to use your real name? Did you ever debate using a pen name? And was it just too much pressure? I feel like I would panic at trying to come up with a cool pen name and immediately regret whatever I went forward with. I'd just be like, no, I take it back. Don't put it on the book. So
There is
what made
nothing
motivated you?
you just could, and there was nothing like at that time you could buy the Silhouette romances and the Harlequin romances, which owned Silhouette.
Mm,
You could write them in the buy them in the grocery store. They were on the magazine rack.
yeah, they were like at checkout. And then there was also like off to the side, there was a whole section. I remember that.
So I could walk into the grocery store and even and see my name there, and it was just such a cool thing.
Yeah,
And you'd
that
be
is
like,
really cool.
"Hey, hey, this is me. Look
You just
right."
like stand next to
I stand next to it. Yeah,
it.
like, this is me. This is me. And
Someone's
you
like,
can't
"You're, are
really
you
do
the?"
that with an alias. You just like, no, really, really,
I
this is me.
promise. I
I
swear.
promise. Yeah.
Someone's gonna be like, "Are you the model on the cover? It doesn't look like you." And you're like, "No, no, no, no. I promise. I wrote this."
Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder why. It must have not been like profitable enough to justify the shelf space at the grocery store or something. Cause that was like, I mean, that was well through my childhood that there was that huge book
Yeah.
section at the grocery store. And it wasn't
I
just like the shorter books. It was like all books would come out there.
I'm wondering to myself if that has to do with e-readers.
Yeah. I also wonder if Amazon kind of killed that with like just the mass production and like availability of books, like that kind of online market, if that really
Could
took away
be,
the profitability.
could be.
Rascally Amazon. Yeah.
Yeah, next time we'll be back with actual book under our belt and ready to dissect, think about, talk about, and disclose.